On behalf of SSTR, I'll be presenting the proposed new pancreas allocation policy, moving to concentric circles as first unit of allocation. I have no disclosures. The Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network, OPTN, passed a new national pancreas policy. This deceased donor pancreas allocation policy removed donor service area, or DSA, and OPTN region as geographic units of allocation. The change was made to better comply with the OPTN final rule. Changes to allocation policy are not intended to be final solutions, but rather intermediary step towards a borderless allocation system. The SRTR was asked to conduct simulations of several potential policy scenarios that I will go over next. In order to assess these policy scenarios, we use the Simulated Allocation Models, or SAMs. This is a family of computer simulated programs developed by SRTR. The family includes the KPASAM, or Kidney Pancreas Simulation Allocation Model, which were used to develop the results that I'll show you. The SAMs takes real candidate and donor information and uses it to simulate allocation by applying new rules the OPTN committee would like to explore. The software then outputs information on model results of new allocation rules, including the number of candidates who underwent transplant, those that died waiting, and those that died post-transplant. The SAMs include some random components, reflect uncertainty in the acceptance decisions when an organ is offered to a potential recipient, the unpredictable life expectancy that can result from undergoing or not undergoing a pancreas transplant. To account for random variation, the SRTR runs the model several times with the same set of allocation rules, organs, and candidates to determine the average outcomes. And that's the data that I'll be showing you. So here's the conceptual flow chart of the data. The KPASAM software takes real candidates and donors from a particular year and simulates allocation policy by applying new rules that we'd like to explore. The software then outputs information on the number of candidates transplanted, the number of candidates that died while waiting, and the post-transplant deaths. KPASAM uses models to estimate things like offer acceptance model and the post-transplant survival model, and these models account for donor and candidate characteristics. The KPASAM input files were updated to include transplant candidates listed on the kidney, or pancreas waiting list, donors whose kidneys or pancreata were recovered for transplant between January 1st, 2017 and December 31st, 2017 were included. The results included all 10 iterations of each model. Here's an example of how approximately points were included in the allocation scenarios that we modeled. Points were awarded in a linear fashion, so candidates listed at the donor hospital at the center of the fixed distance circle will receive a maximum of 1 point, as shown in this figure here. All other candidates would receive fewer points, up to 500 nautical miles. Candidates at 500.1 nautical miles away from the donor hospital would be awarded maximum number of 2 points, and those points would decrease linearly up to 2,500 nautical miles. No points were awarded after 2,500 nautical miles. Here is an example of scenarios that included a step function, and in these scenarios they contained a plateau of points inside the fixed distance circle. In this example, 4 points were awarded to all candidates within 150 miles of the donor hospital. All candidates outside the 150 nautical miles but within the inner circle received less than 4 proximity points in a linear fashion. So here are the different scenarios that were modeled. First, we modeled the baseline model, which is the current allocation policy, but with pediatrics given priority. and that include the local, regional, and national sharing. These were the other scenarios, which are denoted by the circle size for kidney transplants, for kidney, pancreas, and pancreas alone transplants, the inner circle maximum points, and the outer circle maximum points. The last two scenarios included those plateau points also. The distance travel was greater in larger circles, example the 500 nautical mile circle, and minimized in smaller circles, example the 150 nautical miles. The results also showed that the proximity points within the circle tend to reduce the distance travel. The effect of proximity points outside the circle was less strong, likely because relatively few transplants were predicted there. Only 10 to 20% of the transplants were predicted there. The KP transplants traveled the shortest distance, and the PA transplants traveled the furthest. So here's this data shown in a graph. Here are the results showing the distribution of organ travel distance for kidney pancreas transplants. These violin plots show that the distribution of organ travel distance for kidney pancreas transplants varied by the fixed circle size. Approximately 80% of the transplant occurred within the concentric circle around the donor hospital. As you can see, in these 500 nautical mile circles, most of the transplants occurred within the 500 nautical miles, and within the 250 nautical mile scenarios, most of the transplant occurred in those 250 nautical miles, and likewise for the 150 nautical mile circles. These are violin plots showing the distribution of organ travel distance for pancreas alone transplants. Once again, approximately 80% of the transplants occurred within the concentric circle around the donor hospital. Here are the results of the subgroups. Kidney pancreas transplants rates increased globally under all scenarios among African American candidates, non-Latino, female candidates, and candidates with CPR greater than 80%. Pancreas alone transplants rates decreased globally under all scenarios. Candidates aged greater than 35 years and candidates with CPR greater than 80% had slightly more transplants, and candidates less than age 35 and candidates with CPR less than 80 had slightly less transplants. The SAMs has some limitations, and this has implications for policy development. The SAMs rely on aggregate historical data, so the SAMs do not predict changes in organ acceptance behavior or identify trends over time. The SAMs work best for modeling small changes applied to large patient groups. They are unlikely to give reliable predictions for small population subgroups, so they're not designed to predict outcomes below an OPO level. The SAMs assume standardized behavior across the whole country. Center and OPO level variation in policy or practice is not modeled. Directed and expedited allocations are also not modeled. The SAMs also has some other limitations. Organs are discarded after a fixed number or 200 declined offers, regardless of the organ and donor characteristic. The SAMs are not designed to predict an overall number of transplants. That's why I didn't show you that data in my presentation. Overall, SAMs are good tools to estimate relative magnitude direction of possible effects of policy change. However, some policy changes may be justified even in the absence of clear simulation results. The limitations of SAMs have been published by us previously in this publication. So in conclusion, the number of transplants varied by less than 200 across all scenarios. Kidney pancreas and PA allocation systems are highly related, with kidney pancreas and pancreas candidates receiving absolute priority over kidney candidates through the first or formerly local level of allocation. Kidney pancreas candidates outnumbered the pancreas alone candidates by 3 to 1. Under broader sharing, kidney pancreas candidates tended to benefit more than pancreas alone candidates. In general, when kidney, pancreas, and pancreas alone circles and KI circles are of the same size, relatively more kidney pancreas transplants are performed, and relatively fewer pancreas alone and kidney alone transplants are performed. In contrast, when the kidney pancreas and pancreas alone circles are smaller than the kidney alone circle, both the kidney alone and pancreas transplant decline less. Proximity points effectively limit travel distance. Kidney pancreas transplant rates increase globally under all scenarios among African American candidates, non-Latino female candidates, and candidates with CPRA greater than 80%. Pancreas alone transplant rates decrease globally under broader sharing. Candidates aged greater than 35 years and candidates with CPR greater than 80% had slightly more transplants. OPTN committee and the board approved the 250, 250, 2 proximity points and 4 proximity point allocation policy. This policy involves a single circle with a radius of 250 nautical miles around the donor hospital, with a maximum of 2 proximity points within the circle, with a maximum of 4 proximity points outside the circle. No proximity points were allocated after 2,500 nautical miles away from the donor hospital. The new policy is an intermediary step towards borderless sharing to comply with the final rule. Here is the list of folks from SRTR and OPTN UNOS that made this work possible. Thank you for your time.